Welcome back to The Price of Business. I'm your host, Kevin Price, talking to you about you and your business. Got my friend on, Brian Domitrovic. He's been on the program now a couple of times, and my hope is to have him on even more often here in the months to come. Love the work that he does. He's with Sam Houston State University. He's the chairman of the history department over there. He's an economic historian, which for some reason they seem to be harder and harder to come by. I wanted to ask you about that, Brian. It seems like 20 or 30 years ago, a lot of departments, a lot of colleges had specialties in economic history. I don't see it as often. What's up with that?
Yeah, that's an interesting story. I noticed that myself when I was in graduate school in the 1990s during the huge boom. I mean, in the 1980s and the 1990s, the left liberal professor had decided we didn't want to study economic history because the economy was succeeding so well. They didn't want to tell that story. They only, being good Marxists, they wanted to tell the story of the economy failing. It's only since the Great Recession in 2008 that you've seen a kind of weird reinvigoration of economic history. Everyone's studying the history of capitalism and Thomas Piketty and all that. Don't buy it. I mean, people abandoned economic history because they didn't want to tell the story of the success of the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah, no question about it. I think that's true. And but it's interesting, and that explains so much why it was huge, particularly in the 60s and 70s during the that Great Recession. And then all of a sudden, it just evaporated. Very, very hard to come by. So tell us a little bit about the work, before we get started on your book that you recently edited. Tell us a little bit about the work that you do over there at Sam Houston State University.
Yeah, sure. I'm the chairman of the Department of History, and I wrote a book called Iconoclast, which is a history of the Reagan Revolution in economics. And actually, we're running a graduate seminar next spring on the papers of the supply-side revolution. A lot of the kind of great heroes of the supply-side revolution, including Alan Reynolds, who coined the term supply-side economics, have given me their papers personally, and I'm going to have the graduate students organize them, and we're going to set them up in an archive. It'll be great.
Yeah, and in fact, I'm planning on being involved in that class. You and I talked about that, so
you bet.
We'll need to chronicle that during the semester.
Excellent idea.
Yeah, I love that. So tell us about the book. What's the thesis there?
Yeah, so the book that was just released last week, I put together with Arthur Laffer. Arthur Laffer is the founder of supply-side economics. He came up with the Laffer curve about if you cut taxes, you increase revenues, the most famous economics graph of the 20th century. We just released this book last week at the Ronald Reagan Ranch in Santa Barbara, California, and it's the beginning, the first volume in the kind of the collected works of Arthur Laffer. So these are 10 major papers that he and his firm produced from 1978 to 2007, and we want to just start publishing this stuff. The actual published research of the supply-side economists is so great, and now we're starting to make it available broadly.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I think it's fantastic. So tell us a little bit about the economy today, what you see out there today that resonates from an economic historian, red flags, things that people should be aware of.
Yeah, well, I mean, I take the stock market, pretty seriously in general. I mean, the stock market's done well, and now it's taken a little pause. And I think what we see is the evidence of a lame duck president. I mean, we saw this president and the Democratic Congress for a while take their big cuts at the economy. And now they're basically being ushered out of power, probably. So the stock market has shot up and now has taken a pause. And if that's for real, if we're really going to see things like the attenuation, if not repeal, of Obamacare, if we're really going to see the Fed get serious about the dollar again and maybe a cap on taxes and spending, boy, is the economy going to take off.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, but then all of a sudden it becomes competitive on the international scene. And when do you think we begin to learn that lesson, by the way? Gordon Brown, his parting present to the people of England was a massive tax increase on the top 1%, half of whom disappeared for tax purposes within 4 years, going to mainly to Middle European countries. When do we figure out the competitive nature of taxes?
Yeah, France found out the same thing. They tried to raise tax rates to 75%, and people just leave the country. I mean, the funny thing about that is the bureaucrats are trying to come up with this tax harmonization where all countries have high tax rates. Yeah, well, that's not going to happen. I mean, everybody knows. The answer to when we figured it out is that everyone knows you can't control the world. I mean, there's always some place to go to. So, I mean, if the United States and the IRS wants to say, we're going to have a 35% corporate tax, even though everyone else's rate is 17%, I mean, they know that's just untenable. You got to cut that tax.
Yep, except I guess that's a great way of getting rid of the people that are holding progress back, quote, progress back.
Kevin, I'm very sympathetic to that view. If you have high tax rates, then you get rid of the kind of people that you don't like. The Northeast and California, I was just in California last week, California specializes in that. I had lunch with the CEO of CKA Enterprises, Carl's Jr., the restaurant chain, and they're very famously kind of moving their headquarters to Nashville, Tennessee, just like Arthur Laffer himself went from Palos Verdes, California to Nashville, Tennessee, because the tax rate is 0% income tax rate in Nashville, and it's 13% in California. And California's happy to see those people go. Oh, you're conservatives. You're supply-siders. See you later.
Yeah, glad to see you go. By the way, I guess take away our employees who don't have our same philosophical interests as we do. And by the way, also need to figure out how to take care of their families.
Hey, let me tell you something about Carl's Jr., about how they run their company. It's a very interesting little story. They're opposed to the increase in the minimum wage.
Right.
You know why? Because they pay their employers above the minimum wage. They pay their employees very well. And they're like, we don't want wages raised generally because then we won't be able to hire the employees we want. The market knows what the correct wages are. So you will actually see a big problem in the labor market because people who really want to run a good business will not be able to attract workers because all wages are high.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Craig Jelinek, the CEO of Costco, he wants to see wages go up. And I think the reason why is because it has a devastating effect on potential competitors.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. Yeah, right. So it's kind of narrow competitive advantage, and they're kind of making peace with the liberals and the progressives on that.
Yeah. Meanwhile, he looks like a rock star, but the reality is he is going to wage his competitors out of existence, just like the use of major corporations like Mobil and the energy companies back in the early 90s to try to get various regulations to eliminate the mom-and-pop gas station across the country. Oh, yeah, this is good for business. This is good for mega business, but not for mom-and-pop companies.
Hey, regulatory capture. George Stigler won the Nobel Prize for this. Yeah, guess who writes the regulations? The people in power. It's, when you cut regulations, then you start to see the unlevel playing field. This is why the Ronald Reagan era saw the huge boom in entrepreneurialism, because, the great age of the Fortune 500 was prior to that. And then you saw the Fortune 500 get scared. Uh-oh, what are all these companies that are coming out of nowhere? That was an era of deregulation.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing about people to understand is that the reality is that there are really different dynamics between large business and the small business. And a lot of times regulations, taxation, even minimum wage is a form of protectionism for larger companies.
You bet. The Fortune 500 was founded in 1955 for a reason. That's when the marginal rate of the income tax was 91%. They had it made in the shade. These people wrote the tax code. Once you started cutting taxes, first in 1964 and then 1981, those tax exemptions and everything like that became less valuable because taxes were lower, and that's when you saw the Apples, the McCaw Cellulars, and everything else upend the corporate order.
And that was a very articulate statement on your part that showed how that tax environment that the left always points to Eisenhower, and his forward thinking with that high tax rate. But the reality was it was a corporatist policy. It wasn't something that was beneficial for average Americans.
You can read the tax code. It's funny. You can read like obvious sources like the Harvard Law Review from the 1950s. All these tax attorneys are saying, well, this new tax provision was brought about by this lobbyist from this corporation. It's just entirely captured by the corporations. And they were initially opposed to that Kennedy tax cut and then the Reagan tax cut, but sure enough, they got it. And, the economy prospered so well, everyone forgot about the opposition.
Yeah, it's funny how that works. People are pretty myopic when it comes to that type of thing, I'm afraid. All right, he's been a great guest as usual. I always like to have him on. I look forward to having him on again in the very near future. Look forward to his class. We'll be talking about that as well. Brian Domitrovic, he is a professor and the chairman of the history department at Sam Houston State University, and that is shsu.edu. And what's your website again? I guess it's briandomitrovic.com. And for those who need that spelling, which would be me, is Domitrovic. That's Brian, Brian, Domitrovic, Domitrovic.com. And check out the great information there, including your book and much, much more. Brian, good to talk to you again.
Great to be here.
When we come back, much more for you. I do want to remind you, best content here shows up over there at usdailyreview.com, and this is The Price of Business.